I'm doing the demonstration of this roll hem here because we're going to be setting up the sleeve for adding to the jacket. And it makes sense to put in some of this before we actually put it into the garment. So I just figured it's a good idea to get a sense of where we're going. And so let me just show you this little tiny roll hem. Now, just as a true confession here, I cannot do a roll hem or like a lovely roll hem to save my life. So this is my solution. It's flexible, it's narrow, and it's easy to do. It's not a hand-rolled edge, but it looks pretty darn good if I say so myself. So there you have it. This is what we're going to be looking at next. Before we add the sleeves to the bodice, we want to prepare the roll edge. So I'm going to take these off, set this aside. So if you remember, we stay stitched through the paper, and you can see the blue ink makes the stitching look darker. So what I will do is take this over to the pressing table to press that to make the ink disappear. Now, just the thing to know, the thing to kind of keep in mind, we're going to be starting the roll hem before we put the sleeve to the bodice. And so the first pass where we sew the pearl cotton is actually going to sew on the front side of the fabric. So that's just something to keep in mind as we progress. The stay stitching is here, and what I show you next, I'm taking a little sidebar to show you the roll hem because I think it's useful to see where that's going before we install the sleeve. So again, I'm going to press that off so that ink disappears. I'll bring everything back, and we're going to be sewing the pearl cotton to the front side of the fabric. So here is one of the sleeve pieces that we basted out and cut out, and I've actually stay stitched. And after I stay stitched, I pressed so the ink disappears. So again, we have clean stitching. Now, before I continue, one thing I like to do, because I'm going to be tearing this region of the paper off, what I like to do is sew just some bar tacks on each end of the stitching. And this is, roughly about 2 inches up from the seam. So there's one and the other. Because I don't want the basting to unravel until I actually construct the sleeve. So making these bar tacks, just as we did on the shoulder seam, are going to keep that from happening. So now, what I want to do here is remove this basting and remove the paper. So I will be tearing the paper away, and it's somewhat easy. So you just tear it like you're tearing a check out of a checkbook. And then I'm going to lift this off here, and I can take a little bit of the basting out here and here because I have made those two tacks. I think I'm just going to fold this back for now. You could tear it away if you wish, but as you can see, we have our stay stitching exposed. We need this exposed so when we go to the machine, we can have our guide. Now this, again, right side of the fabric. So I will meet you at the machine. This is the foot setup for this particular operation. You can see that the little hole in the front of the foot, we've fed the pearl cotton in, and I like to have the 2 thread tails out here because eventually what I'll do is I'll grab all 3 of them as I'm putting this through the machine. So now let's begin the work. So you can see here I went ahead and tore away the paper. What we want to do here is we want to start about 2 inches in from the cut edge. We don't want to start sewing this at the cut edge. We're going to leave some extra behind because we want to join up the pearl cotton after we've sewn the sleeve seam. But this lays it down to begin with to get us going. So now we just, okay, there we are. And so you can see here the hole, this little hole here lines up with the stay stitching. And like I said, we are starting about 2 inches from the cut edge, and we'll stop 2 inches from the opposite cut edge. The zigzag stitch width is 2.0 and the length is 2.0, and you keep a loose tension on the cord. Really, it's a matter of just steering, keeping the cord from getting knotted, keeping the fabric flat, and after a few initial stitches, what you want to do is you want to pull kind of along the seam. You want to keep the fabric flat on the machine. And as you go, so with one hand you steer, with the other hand you hold the pearl cotton. Okay, so we are about 2 inches from the end, and we stop, we pull the work out. And you can, let me just turn this over here so you can see the results. We want the pearl cotton to be a little longer on each end than the cut edges. We can always trim it down later. So now, so we've laid this down. This is going to be on the finished edge. So I'm going to go off camera and construct the French seam on the sleeve, and then we will continue. The alternate is to use the open toe embroidery foot, and as you can see here, I'm holding the cord at a 45-degree angle, and I'm actually stretching in front of and behind the presser foot as I'm sewing. And with this way, you don't have to worry like I said, try to keep it at a 45-degree angle. And try to put a little tension lengthwise on the seam to keep the fabric flat. So as you can see here, I'm back. I've sewn the seam. And now we want to join up the two ends of the pearl cotton, and I tend to overlap them right at the side seam, or the underarm seam in this case. So again, the stitch length is, the stitch setting is a 1.5 width and a 1.5 length. And so really, notice I've changed to the open toe embroidery foot. You don't need to feed this back through the foot anymore. So we're gonna start by, you can overlap these stitches just a bit. And hold the threads back, sorry. And this is where you can just hold this up as you're stretching the seam lengthwise. And so now as we get to this seam, we can come in here and start getting that kind of in position. And now notice the needle is to the left, so I'm going to come in here and bring that there, lower the foot, and so you can sew both of them for a few stitches, and then you can come in here, trim that out. And you just keep sewing until you join up with the previous row of zigzag. And there we are. Now, let me take the work out, give you a good look. So there. And now, this is where, carefully, come in here and you trim both of these off. So you have the two overlapping slightly, and you can actually just press that. So now we will go over to the pressing table to press. Now we press this first as sewn. Again, no steam. And then, let me zoom in a little more here so you can see this. We're going to press this up. So the fabric is actually going to fold over the cord. So we're pressing this up against the front of the fabric. So this is, you press that, and I'll just take it back this way so you can see it. And again, there's no race here. You want to get it accurate. So the chiffon will wrap around the cord, which is being held by the zigzag stitches. So let me give you a closer look here. Oh, there we are. So that's what we have. We rolled that over the pearl cotton. Now, back to the machine for the next step. Now, this is where the adjustable zipper foot comes in. Now let me show you. I'm going to zoom in real close here. You want the needle to be just inside the edge of the foot. And you want it on the right-hand side of the foot as I show here. So that is the setup. The stitch length is 2.0 to 2.5. So what we're going to do is we're going to slip this on the free arm. What did we do before free arm machines? So now what's going to happen, I like to start a little in front of the seam. It's a little easier than trying to start behind the seam. And now hold your threads, and it's just a straight stitch like you're making a piping. So what you're going to do is create a little bit of a pull to the left as you're steering this through, because you want it to sew right next to the pearl cotton. And again, the stitch length is 1.5, fairly short stitch. Okay, so as we come up to where we began, I'm going to trim those threads here, and you have to go a little slower jumping over this seam. It's just the way it is. It's a little bit thick, but okay. Okay, there we are. So now let me take the work out and zoom out a little bit. Just trim these threads close. Now let me just turn and show you the result. That is what you're going for. Because see what's going to happen next, we're going to bring this up and around, and we'll come in again and sew right along that fold. So I will meet you back at the pressing table. So here we are at the pressing table. So what I like to do here is we're going to fold this seam allowance out, and we're going to press so that the roll hem faces the raw edges here. And this is just something you have to be patient with. Okay, so I have that all pressed. There we go. Now I will go back to the work table for the next step. So here we are back at the work table. So the object here is we're going to take this seam allowance and come up and over. We're going to encase the pearl cotton in the seam allowance and pin so what we're going to do first, we're going to pin it, then we're going to thread baste. Now, something to know when you're wrapping this around, try to create a pull on the seam allowance. You want this to be as snug as possible. It's going to give you a better result in the end. And this is where the long silk pins are very useful. Helps you to pin more in one operation. Okay. Coming up on the end. Voila. So now it's all pinned. Next, I'm going to get a needle and thread so we can baste. So now I have needle and thread. What I would recommend is a very fine needle, and even rayon machine embroidery thread. I'm using this rather large bright orange for demonstration purposes. But you don't want to sew it. You want the stitches to be about 2 millimeters from that fold. And you want them to be fairly close together. And as you're working, really make sure that that fabric is wrapped smoothly around the pearl cotton, because this is going to give you a good success. Now, I'm just going to let you know, some people think, oh, why don't we just pin it and sew it? Now, I've tried that, and what happens is you think, oh, it's going to be all good. And if it were just a long, straight go, you could be okay. But if you're working on any kind of complex curve, you're going to get some rippling. So as much as you think you're saving time, what will happen is if you have to rip this out, it's a damn nosebleed to rip out. Don't ask me how I know that. Okay, we are coming to the end. And what you will do, secure your thread. And cut. And we are now ready to go back to the machine. We are back at the machine. And again, it's easier to start in front of the seam rather than behind it. So really, again, we're going to put this foot down. We want the needle in. Let me just zoom in so you can see. Because the object here, we want the needle to sit next to this. We want the stitches to travel right along there. This is like a stitch in the ditch. This is like a Hong Kong seam, actually. That's where the idea came from. The stitch length here is 1.5 to 2.0. And let's let her rip. Okay, we're almost at the end. You don't really want to catch the basting stitches in this. It's a short machine stitch, so try to avoid that if you can. So come here and overlap these stitches. Okay, now let me just remove the work. Show you the result. That's what you're looking for. Now, I'm not going to make you watch me take out this hand basting. I will take out the hand basting and meet you at the pressing table. So there we have the hem. And I just want to press it before I trim. So that's going to be our next step, but that will occur at the work table. So again, no steam. Just want to press this flat. Okay, so now we are ready for trimming. So we're back from the pressing table. Now to trim, we want to turn this inside out. We want to free up the seam allowances, which are on the inside now. And really, it's just a matter of trimming very close to the stitches. Now you notice this is a rounded nose scissor. I find that you're less likely to snag something with this particular scissor. And really, it's just you have to be very careful. This is just one of those things. You do this when you're nice and relaxed, and you just want to trim the seam allowance to about 2 millimeters. There we are, yeah. So now, to make a cleaner cut, you want to use all of the blade. One of the things that happens if you use only about an inch of it, everything looks like it was cut out with nail scissors. Don't do that. It just looks terrible. So I will continue off camera. And this here, you get these a little bit of a wobble because you're going to, especially if you're trying to see this through a camera. But you want it trimmed. So I will go off camera and finish this and bring back the results. So here we have the roll hem. Now, someone asked me, oh, that's a raw edge. Yes, it is. You're not going to be digging ditches in this, so the raw edge really won't cause you any trouble. So I'm going to turn this right side out and show you. That is the hem. So I feel it's just helpful to see all of this before we actually start constructing the sleeve. It will make everything make sense later.